today. My name's Joe Zender, and I'm the Chief Planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, City of Portland. And I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to hear about this project. I want to thank the East Portland Neighborhood Organization for hosting us and for the food. Just a little logistics. If you need the restroom, it's straight through the kitchen in the back there. I'm here with Morgan Tracy, who's sort of our lead planner on this residential infill project. Tonight, and throughout through August 15th, we're doing a series of these kind of discussions with folks to present some ideas that we've been working on for almost a year with a stakeholder committee of
26.
How much?
26.
26 people. From development community, from neighborhoods, from designers, from other interest groups. The purpose of the open houses and the purpose of our meetings here is to give everybody the chance to understand the proposal that's coming out of that process. And what we're doing with this proposal is coming up with a concept about how to think about residential infill. And everybody knows what residential infill is. It's in our single-family neighborhoods when either on a vacant lot or a subdivided lot or sometimes on a demo lot, new buildings are built that are single-family but it's new construction. We're looking at how to deal with the concerns that have come up with those residential infill projects. So we're going to present for about 30 minutes. We'd like to take 20 minutes or so questions, to clarify. And then we'd like to end this sort of presentation section and get back out, and we're going to stay till 8 and we can talk at the boards. And what we've discovered is some people thrive on this kind of forum, where it's presentation and ask questions, and some people really get their information better in different ways. So we're trying to have it both ways to make sure we get the information across as clearly to as broad a range of folks as possible. So that's what we're doing. As I said, the presentation we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little issues in the background. Morgan's going to go over the draft proposal, and then we wind up talking about next steps in Q&A. As I said, here's our timeline that we're doing this public outreach through August. Then we take what we've learned from this and review the feedback and revise our proposal. And this open house is one forum for giving feedback, and the comments that we're taking outside or the comment sheets that you may have when you came in are really important to us in terms of compiling and getting sort of the specifics of comments. There's other ways to comment. There's a online questionnaire. You have paper copies of it tonight, but there's an online version of that questionnaire. So if you want to do it online, you're welcome to do that. And if you want to tell your neighbors to go look at it, we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. We're already up into thousands of responses. Have we got that far?
Several thousand attendees on the online open house.
Okay. And then
and the questionnaire link will be live until August 15th?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. And then there is an online open house, which is sort of an online version of what you're going to see tonight or the board, so that more people can get a glimpse of what it is that we're presenting. So all those forms of input and opportunities to read this are out there, and please spread the word. The topic is residential infill development. Some of you may be here tonight out of just general interest. Some of you may already be concerned about the infill that you're seeing in your neighborhood in terms of the size of the design of the types of houses. Some of you may be concerned about the demos. Some of you may be concerned about the need for more additional housing or housing choices in the city. So tonight, all of those topics are things that we want to hear about in the comment section. We've already talked about what infill is. And infill that we're talking about in this project is in our single-family parts of town. And this is a zoning map, and the colors on it relate to the type of land use what you can build in different parts of the city. And basically, the simplified version is the yellow parts are our single-family zoned areas. So that's where you can build single-family houses, and it's more than 44% of the land that we have in the city is dedicated to that single type of development. The blues and the reds are multifamily, commercial, and central city kinds of development. So predominantly, or the largest single land use designation we have is the single-family stuff. We undertook this project at the direction of Mayor Hales in response to a number of concerns. You know, as I've already mentioned, people are concerned about the size of infill development. They're concerned about demos too, and they're concerned about what's showing up after the demo or on vacant lots, which seems too big and out of context with their neighborhoods. Can we do something about that? People are concerned about the affordability crunch in the city. And this is a graphic that was prepared by the Bureau of Housing to talk about affordability in their annual report on housing. And average porcelain, and so the data is maybe a year and a half old now, but the average Portland household, in terms of how much income it has, can afford a house, two-bedroom house, in the areas shown in blue. If you're a three-person low-income household, the amount of town that is typically, you know, on average, affordable to you significantly decreases. If you find yourself a Latino household, an African-American household, based on the income that you see in those types of groups, affordability is even more crunched. And what we've seen over the last years, a couple of years, is that this situation's getting tighter and tighter and moving up to more and more income groups. So people are concerned about this. People are concerned about the lack of housing choice. We're growing as a city, and as I said, most of our housing land is in single family. In between single family houses on big lots and single family houses on small lots, most of our housing stock is in single family houses as well. And that's not what that's not where most of the new development is happening. So there's a concern about the lack of choice.
I understood you to say that 44% of the land in Portland was zoned for single-family housing, but up here I see 56%. Can you explain?
Oh no, this is number of housing units.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
the
and
size.
you know, I want to try to get through the presentation and
Okay,
do Q&A at the end and get out of the way, because actually what Morgan's going to talk about is a lot more interesting than what I'm talking about. So that's the concerns we heard. Here's some things just to keep in mind about what's happening in the city. We're growing. By 2035, we're expected to grow by 123,000 households. Today we have 300 and some, so it's, you know, a 30% growth rate. It's not as big as Beijing, but it's significant. It's, and when we look at the land that we have in the city and where new development can go, we have enough land capacity to accommodate this level of growth, but it doesn't come without change. And the households, the housing needs that we have, the kind of households and the conditions that the households are in, as we grow over this time, are changing. The households are getting a little bit smaller, not hugely smaller. Still, there's a good preponderance of the households that are going to have school-age children or children, so that's another type of demand. As a city, we're increasing in our cultural or racial diversity, and like everywhere, like a lot of American cities, as a population, our population's getting older. The housing needs that we have today and how we meet them are, you know, one thing. The housing needs of this future sort of set of households that's going to make up Portland are going to be different in ways that will reflect these changes. Third, finally, we just completed the comprehensive plan in the city. And it's a plan that talks about how we want to grow over the next 25 years. And one of the major elements of it is this notion of having more Portland households have access to, for lack of a better term, what we're calling complete neighborhoods. So what the heck is that? That is a place where the way it's developed and the number of people who live there support businesses, services, and transit that allow you to live your households to live there and get more of their sort of day-to-day needs met without having to get in the car driving to someplace more remote. Not all of your needs are met there by any means, but more of them are. Why is that important? Well, you know, it's important to meet our goals as a city to give people more options than having to drive. A big part of that is people who have to drive have access to roads that have capacity, because we get people who have other choices off of those roads when they drive. It's a healthier way because it encourages walking and encourages access to open space more broadly to more people. And one of the things that we did when we did this comprehensive plan was ask ourselves, what would it look like if you were designing growth and designing a city where your main interest was having it be something that might contribute to the health of the households and the families that live there. So complete neighborhoods was part of that. Some people have the characteristics of what it means to, some areas of town have this already, a significant number. Some, and a lot of that is East Portland because of just how it's developed with arterials and when it was developed, have less of those characteristics. To meet our objectives, we need to have more people have access to the neighborhoods that already have these characteristics. We need to be investing and growing in the parts of town that don't have those conditions, so that we bring those areas along as well, give more households access. Okay. Part of what happens when you want to talk about accomplishing that, and when you look at actually some of our most complete neighborhoods in the city, you see that there's rather that indeed it's single-family houses. That's what makes up most of these areas. But especially in the older areas, it included a wider diversity. This came from like the streetcar era, where even in those single-family neighborhoods, you're going to have mixed-in duplexes. You're going to have mixed-in triplexes and three flats, you know, three that are in one unit. And in a lot of them, you're going to have garden apartments too. It was just how we built earlier in the century, the 20th century, that kind of middle product, which allows people to live closer in, that allows more people without being high rises and bigger buildings to fill, to live comfortably in a single family neighborhood, our current zoning doesn't allow. And so part of what we wanted to talk about was how to bring back this spectrum of options that we've seen in all other neighborhoods. And we're just talking about the single family part. You know, the full spectrum goes up into things that are multifamily buildings, and that's not our topic. That's not what we're talking about in single family neighborhoods. And as we did the process to do this, like I said, we had a 30-some person committee, and we went through that and we described the goals of what we wanted to keep in mind when you were talking about these issues of what should the infill look like. Should we consider, how should we develop on skinny lots, and should we consider more housing opportunities? And this were the pros and cons, or the criteria that diverse, relatively diverse group wanted to put on the table. And the value of this is just to note that we're going to get a range of opinions in this room. We're going to get a range of opinions throughout this process, but I'll bet that a lot of that is captured by some points of view put more weight on some of these, some points of view put more weight on the others, and that's what our discourse, that's what our discussion and decision making about this is going to be about. Okay? And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Morgan, who's going to go through the details of what's coming out of this proposal.
Thanks, Drew. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. It's a nice night. It's actually nice and cool in this room, so that's helpful. Anyways, I'm Morgan Tracy. I'm the project manager for the residential infill project. I want to spend a little time talking about the draft proposals. There are 3 topics that are covered here: addressing scale of houses, housing types, and historically narrow lots. Each of those has a couple different proposals embedded in them. So I just want to give a sort of broad topic flavor overview of what these proposals are, so you have a better understanding of what we're talking about when you see the boards out or when you're talking to your friends and neighbors. So if you have one of these already, feel free to follow along. This is just a 4-page summary of the draft proposal. It gives you a little graphic, little text to follow along with, but if you don't worry, I'm still going to walk through it step by step. So in the first topic, we're addressing scale of houses. And so we're looking at size, height, and setbacks. This image shows a range of house sizes, and this first house here is showing the houses that are sort of a typical older vintage of about 1,500 square feet. This far right house is showing what could be built under current zoning on a 5,000 square foot lot, about 6,750 square feet. The largest house that was built in 2013 was about 4,400 square feet. So we're not seeing this far right example yet, but that's sort of an indication of what is possible on lots today. The proposal in the size of houses to 2,500 square feet. And what's a sort of key part of this proposal is it's not a static number. As the size of the lot gets bigger, house sizes can get bigger, and as the size of the lot gets smaller, the house sizes get smaller. So for instance, on a 2,500 square foot lot, you'd be seeing something about 1,750 square feet. On a 12,000 square foot lot, about a 3,000 square foot house. So this size limit is different than building coverage. Building coverage is talking about essentially just the two-dimensional footprint of a house, how much of the land is occupied by the house. The house size limitation that we're talking about is actual square footage of the structure itself, the floors in the house. And the benefit of that approach is that you can either choose to do a single-story, one-level house, for folks that want to have single-level living, or you could stack the house up, 2 stories and have a bigger backyard, or go with a narrower house and have wider side yards. It still allows a lot of flexibility to allocate that space. We also looked at height. So a key change that we're talking about is how we measure height, and we're talking about where we measure from. So there's 2 parts to establishing how tall a house is under our current code: the bottom of the house reference point and the top. So we currently measure from the highest adjacent grade within 5 feet of the house, so the highest point within that 5-foot perimeter, up to the midpoint of the roof on a gable roof. And the effect that this has on a sloping lot is that the house, when you get out towards the downhill side, appears and is in fact much taller than that 30-foot height limit. So the proposal would be to measure from the lowest grade and go up to the 30-foot measurement to the midpoint of that roof. Another key change for height is looking at the current zoning, which allows a 30-foot height measurement to the top of flat roofs or the midpoint of peak roofs. So for flat roofs, we are lowering that to 25 feet with the idea that we're really shooting for a 2-story type product there. The third proposal looks at setbacks, and the issue here is in some streets you'll have a number of houses that are sitting further back along the street frontage, and new houses can go as close as 10 feet on an R5 zone. So they're sitting up in front of the other existing houses. So the proposal is to increase that front setback by 5 feet, but we also recognize that there are areas where there are existing houses that are closer to the street. So we would allow this house to come forward and reduce its setback to match its adjacent neighbor. So the second project topic is kind of what Joe was speaking about when we're talking about middle housing and housing types and additional options for places for people to live. So once we've dialed in the size of the houses, looking at that size limitation, house size limitation, then the next question becomes what number of units is appropriate within that house size. So taking what would be allowed for a normal 2,500 square foot single household, would that be okay to have 2 1,250 square foot duplex units, for instance? So this proposal would allow for extra accessory dwelling units, duplexes in more locations, and triplexes on corner lots. So what's currently allowed under the zoning code is a house can have an accessory dwelling unit, either inside the house or outside. It also allows for duplexes on a corner. So the proposal would allow for a house to have an internal and an external ADU, or a duplex to have an external ADU, or a triplex on the corner. And thinking back to that size limitation, so a triplex on a corner, 2,500 square feet, 3 units inside. This map is showing, what we've mapped here is essentially corridors, Transit corridors, like frequent transit lines, buses that are running on a 50-minute interval. Areas that are centers, like Hawthorne Division or Gateway. And transit stops, max transit stops, and inner area neighborhoods. So it's a sort of an agglomeration of all 4 of those geographies. And within those areas, quarter mile from those designated areas, these additional housing types would be proposed to be allowed. A second proposal, a different housing type, is this notion of cottage clusters. So on larger lots throughout the city, lots that are 10,000 square feet or larger, we would allow for smaller cottage style developments. So these are typically in 1,000 to 1,500 square foot range, single to single and a half level, generally oriented around a common open space. Parking is sort of diminished, subservient on the site. There's some site plan reviews, some architectural controls that would go along with that. That's cottage clusters. And in the R2.5 zone, so an interesting thing, Joe mentioned the 44% of the city's land area is single dwelling zone. R2.5 is a very flexible zone. It allows for row houses, duplexes, attached houses, et cetera. It comprises less than 4%. It's about 3.4% of the city's land area. So in those areas where you have R2.5 zoning, the proposal would say if you have enough land area to have 2 units, 5,000 square foot lot, if you're building from scratch on a vacant site, you would have to build at least 2 units, and you could do that either with an internal ADU, a detached ADU, or you could do a duplex, or if you wanted to go through the land division process to split the lot, you could do that also. Now this one, historically narrow lots, these are kind of an interesting thing, especially when we're talking about East Portland, because there aren't very many very, very few historically platted lots in East Portland. So these are lots in the R5 zone that were subdivided before modern zoning and are often narrower or smaller than the current zoning would require. So they're 25 by 100 or 33 by 100 foot lots. But for the members of the audience that are here tonight from areas that are not East Portland, this may have some more relevance. So I'll go through that real quickly. Yeah, so as this map shows, there's just a little smidge of historically platted lots right there in East Portland. So these areas are showing the same geography, quarter mile from centers and corridors. The historically platted lot locations, the magenta are the areas that are inside that geography, and the darker purple are the lots that are outside. And what we're talking about here is currently, if you wanted to build on a narrow lot, it has to be a vacant lot, and it has to have been vacant for 5 years. So you can build this single narrow house, or you could remove this house and wait 5 years, which doesn't happen very often. The proposal would allow for, if this house were to be removed, a new house could be built here, a pair of attached houses could be built here, but they would be required to be attached because they removed an existing house. Or you could do a flag lot and build a house behind an existing house, provided you're retaining the existing house. So this is a little bit of an added incentive to keep the existing house. And finally, for garages and parking, the final proposal relates to garages and parking where narrow houses are allowed, to address some of the issues relating to their form. As you can see in this photo, the driveways are occupying most of the front yard, and the curb cuts for the driveways are essentially removing any opportunities for on-street parking. The proposal would be to not allow for street-facing garages, not require parking, but still allow for it. So it would look something like this in theory. And I will say it before somebody else does. There are no cars parked on the street. We are aware of that. They're actually parked across the street. So the option here is if you've got this situation and you still want to provide parking, you are able to do that. You can do a shared driveway. And not so prevalent here in East Portland are alleys, but where these narrow lots exist in those areas, there are often alleys. So in cases where you have an alley present, you can have alley access to a rear garage. So these proposals were formulated after extensive discussion with our 26-member SAC, Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And I know there's a lot of you here tonight, some representing East Portland. And I'd like to thank all of you for your time and commitment in helping us with this proposal. As Joe mentioned previously, there are a number of objectives this project is seeking to address and trying to optimize a balance between a number of sometimes competing objectives. Within our stakeholder committee, the perspectives fell across a range of perspectives, but generally fell into two broad categories. So many of the committee members favored the housing diversity perspective and said that the current housing situation requires bold action by the city to address inadequate housing supply and increasing costs, which lead to fewer opportunities and choices across income and mobility spectrums. So basically, we need to create more options in more places. Go bigger, broader. These members generally accepted the reduced scale proposals as a pragmatic trade-off for additional housing type flexibility. On the other hand, some committee members favored a neighborhood context perspective and opposed a one-size-fits-all approach, advocating instead for zoning applied differently to neighborhood pattern areas and contexts across the city. These members said zoning should clearly identify and regulate the allowed density, and that areas appropriate for higher density should be rezoned to R2.5 or R2. Limited changes were supported that would allow increased density very close to centers and selectively along corridors. So if you think about the geography, the map, one group was thinking more options in more places, and the other group was thinking more options but in fewer places. And of course, that's a bit of an oversimplification of a 15-month or 9-month discussion. So I'd also like to point out we have copies of the stakeholder summary report, which summarizes a number of their recommendations pretty succinctly. Not the bundle of minutes we have, but it's about a 14-page report. So feel free to grab a copy or view that online. So our open house objectives here tonight, we want you to take a look at the info boards, learn more about the proposal, talk with staff, ask questions, give us your feedback, talk to the SAC members that are here. They're wearing name tags that are a different color, they're green. Complete the questionnaire if you have time to do it tonight or online at home or later and mail it into us, that's fine. And spread the word. So get the word out to your friends and neighbors. We're trying to, the purpose of this part of our process is to generate discussion and have a big conversation about these proposals in their different forms. So we're taking public input now through August 15th. We'll begin reviewing the feedback in September. Actually, we'll begin reviewing feedback before then, but we'll have a report out in September about the feedback we received. We'll start revising the proposal in October, go to City Council in November for recommendation, and here, just a little pause. This is not City Council adopting the final plan or the new code. This is them giving us direction on which parts of this proposal should be modified, changed, pursued, or what new things we should be looking at. We'll start drafting new rules for adoption in 2017, and if Joe's watching my timeline, he's going to say, you've got until the end of 2017 and then you're done. We'll see if I can hold that. So with that, I thank you. Thank you for coming, and we'll open it up for questions. Just a few. All right. In the back.
The extra ADU is concerning to me, and I'm wondering, not everybody's putting up that first ADU. Why is a second ADU part of the proposal? I mean, wouldn't that potentially turn a single-family home into 3 units, right? That a developer or property management company might want to use as rentals. So buy, a home, and then one home effectively becomes 3 homes.
What?
Do you hear what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I do.
But my main question is, I don't see, we already have an option to get a 1 ADU, right? And I don't see, why don't we wait till we see those ADUs popping up before we offer 2 ADUs, which would incentivize a kind of different kind of development, I suppose.
So that's a good point. The principle, the idea that you're seeing in this is to give more options and give different ways to increase, to actually, put 3 units, but 3 of a certain size, smaller, on a single-family lot. That's part of what the whole debate's about here, whether or not that's a good idea or not a good idea, whether or not that's a good idea for some parts of towns and in others, but you are seeing it correctly, that the place where we're allowing 2 ADUs does take it up to 3. But, you know, the heart of the principle is this. If we, instead of allowing what some people see as McMansions built, those big houses, infill, so you tear down a house or you take an empty lot and you replace it just with one house. So if you don't gain any houses, you just get one house, and people are finding them too big. And being that size, they're thought to be expensive and out of context. This makes sure that if you are getting that single house, it's smaller. It's more in line with what a lot of our neighborhoods are like. And it's saying once you got a house that size, maybe, well, if you put 2 units in there, it's still going to fit in the neighborhood. And the units are going to be smaller because they're fitting in a 2,500 square foot box. And smaller units are going to have lower rents or cost less. And that's all good. And so they add a ADU to that or put 2 ADUs in. It's the same principle because even an ADU is limited to be smaller.
But aren't we jumping the gun? I mean, shouldn't we wait and see if these single ADUs are popping up before we say, add another one, you know?
Well, that's-
Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's a
sort of
good
like
point.
that. I mean, you know, I can see somebody going, let's build an ADU, you know, and you become, in fact, it's kind of a landlord. But if you offer 2 ADUs, then somebody outside is incentivized to go buy a little bungalow in Sumner and turn it into three units.
Got it.
You know,
Yeah,
that,
so-
and so you lose maybe home ownership that way, I guess. I'm just saying, we're forecast, we haven't seen people use 1 ADU yet, really across the board. Why are we adding to the pot? And that
Got your
seems
point.
towards
That's good.
Developers.
Thank you. Next question.
Surprise.
I was actually going to fall asleep.
I'm interested to know, and it's kind of related to your question, is there an emphasis in all of these proposals on encouraging home ownership and occupancy by an owner as opposed to rentals? And is it encouraging people to make changes to their own properties as opposed to developers doing it for profit?
Yeah, so 2 different answers I have for that.
Right, they're 2 different questions, I
Yeah.
know, but it's kind of like, a lot of the concerns are around, are people going to be priced out of owning their homes? And are developers going to be given an unfair advantage to come in and sort of cherry pick?
So I'm not sure how you would be priced out of if you're already owning the home, but in terms of providing for home ownership opportunities, one potential concern is duplexes and triplexes and ADUs are not ownership opportunities unless they are condoed, unless they are created into condos.
People
And-
typically don't live in one half of them, even though everybody says they want to. Yeah.
Sure. And we are seeing some indications in the market that people are starting to do 2-unit condominiums, which is interesting. So how that plays out in the future, can't really speak to that. But in general, those duplexes, triplexes on corner ADUs are generally going to be more rental type products, at least today. The narrow lot proposals is really trying to get at some of the fee simple ownership options and trying to open up some more opportunities for smaller lots, smaller houses on smaller lots. So there's sort of a 2-pronged approach, trying to create opportunities on both those ends to create both rental opportunities, which may also help homeowners buy and support their mortgage, and then fee simple ownership on a smaller lot with a smaller house.
Another way to think of it is this way. One of the reasons, and a big reason why the cost of single-family houses keeps going up, and it does become households of moderate income keep, looking farther and farther out because the house prices tend to go down as you get farther from the center of the city, but even all the way out, house prices are going up. And it's because it's a great city, we're growing, people, there's a big market, people want to live in our single-family neighborhoods, and they're willing to bid up the price. And when the price gets bid up, the options go down for others. When the price gets bid up, people who might have rented in there. Everybody's looking for units and keep moving to other markets, and those prices get bid up too. So part of this is just to increase the number of units, and to do that in these single-family neighborhoods that people now are getting priced out of, because the units will be smaller, so it opens up a range of opportunities for folks that don't exist now at cost levels, just because it's smaller, that don't exist so much now. So that's the idea. Like Morgan said, we're seeing condos come back. Like, it's been a long time since residential condos and small residential condos have been in our market in Portland, but they're coming back. And once again, it's because I think people have enough, there's enough households out there who could get it together. Like a down payment now is 20% minimum. Like, it's different than it was than a lot of us bought houses. So there's enough households that could scrape that together, and the smaller condo unit may be more within a price range. So it may actually have a different kind of effect on home ownership. Next question.
We're here.
I'm a cynic here. On the 2 ADUs, are there any restrictions that you're going to put on these ADUs? Are you going to say they have to be long-term rentals, or can they all be short-term rentals? And short-term rentals aren't going to do anything to increase housing stock, and nobody really wants to put in a long-term rental because you can make a heck of a lot more money on a short-term rental. So the cynic in me says that's what's going to go up, is the short-term rentals, and you're still not going to add to your housing stock.
So there are already limitations on the short-term rentals. If you're going to do a simple permit, meaning just simple notification to your neighbors, you're limited to 2 bedrooms total on the site. So 2 bedrooms in the house, or 2 bedrooms in the ADU, or 1 and 1. So there's a limitation on how many rooms you can rent out, unless you go through a more elaborate, lengthier, costlier conditional use review process. So adding another ADU doesn't necessarily increase the amount of short-term rentals, unless you have a one bedroom ADU and another 1 bedroom ADU, but you still have the house.
And who polices this?
So the Bureau of Development Services.
They just go out and make sure. This doesn't
Complaint
go on
basis.
without anybody knowing about it.
No, it's on a complaint basis, so some of this is going on, and it should. And other cities have found that they've gotten to the point with this Airbnb kind of rental that they have to crack down more, they want to crack down more, and we may find ourselves in that position. We just allowed them, like, it's just been
A year and a half.
So we're sort of seeing how it plays, and what you're saying, anecdotally, we hear a lot, and so we know that's going on. So your skepticism in that regard has got some evidence, so.
Gentleman in the back.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate this effort to get word out, but unfortunately, it's not really working that well. I live in Richmond, off the division, so we've seen all the activity you're aware of. We were told that the 2035 plan would provide all the capacity needed. That was a month ago that statement was made. You can go to the website and read it. If the city's really serious about soliciting public input, they would mail out letters to residents labeled "Crisis, Important Mail. Your property zoning rules are about to change. This could potentially affect the value of your property and the character of your neighborhood." BPS has used the word crisis liberally for the past few years, so why not in that context? The RIP SAC online questionnaire includes no anecdotal questions, just kind of wonky data and building code regulation stuff. How about something like, how would you feel if your neighbor sold their house and a developer demolished it to build a duplex with an ADU on the property? You might get a little information there. Or, do you feel that open space, parks, and community gardens should be integrated into the RIP SAC plans, since more of the backyards and open space in your neighborhood will be reduced? That might be a good information to get that from people. I'm just hearing like a hyped up language about the crisis, but the outreach seems a little more subdued. People have busy lives. They trust their public officials to get their attention when broad and sweeping proposals are being considered that will directly affect them, and we just don't want that trust to be betrayed. So that's just my input.
Thank you. And so that's good input. It's always good. Getting the word out is always challenging. This is the concept stage, so we're trying to flesh it out and get it out as far as we can. If we get to a code change stage of this, you know, that it may be, depending on how we change the code, we will have to send out that notice, and we would have to send it out to every property that would be
Would that be
affected.
kind of too late, though?
No, no,
Horse
it's
it
not.
out of the barn, you know?
No, it's these proposals, that's change all the time. It's not too late, but earlier is better. Yeah.
In the back.
I have a couple clarifying questions.
Great.
So the regulations that are about square footage and height, are those intended just for new houses or also for additions to
That is a
existing?
fantastic question, and I have it on my notes, and I forgot to mention it, so thank you. So the house size limitations apply to both new construction and additions and alterations, you know, increasing square footage on your existing house.
Okay. And then also, I'm wondering how, so you're talking about the things that you're doing for a single-family home to control the bulk and the massing of it. How is that gonna work when you start looking at duplexes and triplexes? Like, are there gonna be square footage requirements? Because I think you could still have the same problem. You could have what looks like a McMansion and still kinda ugly. It's got 2 or 3 units in it, which is better, but it's still kind of not fixing the problem of what people are concerned about, the ugliness and the largeness
So
of the new building.
I can speak to the largeness, that's a little easier. So the house, the size limitation is going to be the entire structure. So whether it's 1 unit or a duplex or a triplex, it's all going to be this big
2,500 square feet?
Yep.
on a 5,000 square foot lot.
And see, that's part of how it's, so if 2,500 or wherever we end up with this, right, because that's just the proposal now, seems to fit more often than not, then when you divide it up, it'll still be the right size, but 2 units. And those, because it's 2,500 feet cut in half, they'll be smaller. And so $1 per square foot, it's going to open up rents and prices for people in neighborhoods where people want to live too.
You, sir.
I want to speak to the quarter mile around the quarters and centers. If you're going to open up a quarter mile around quarters and centers for this proposal, can you speak to how that's going to prevent demolition? And could you also talk about the fact that you're going to have, you're opening up settled neighborhoods that are built out to new housing, so that means in order for the new housing to come to life, the old housing has to be demolished. Can you speak to how this is going to prevent demolition?
Can you speak to how it's currently preventing demolition
Yes,
for single houses?
isn't that why we're trying to come up with a construction resolution, and we talked about demolition earlier
Right,
this year?
that's right.
So, to me, this just is more giving away the land and making the houses turn into smoke.
So-
Yeah, it's a new construction. So to the extent that demand for single-family houses like they are today are leading to demos, the way this might blunt that is the demo is only going to be 2,500 square feet. So what you can replace it with is not a McMansion, it's this thing that's, you know, still big maybe in a lot of our neighborhoods, right? But it's, you know, more within the size of a lot of our neighborhoods. And then, yes, you could put duplexes in it. And we'll try to do some analysis on this, but it's not necessarily that for a developer who is coming in to tear down a house and build a house, that there's necessarily more money to be made building 2 units than 1. And the reasoning is this: there's enough demand out there now for single-family houses that it's kind of precious, right? That's why the prices are going through crazy, right, in a lot of neighborhoods. So people want them, they got the money, they're going to pay for it. A duplex is a different product. It's not your 2,500 square foot house. So if you wanted a McMansion, a duplex is even one more step away from being that McMansion. Could some people build these and try to become landlords? Maybe, but you could build, like you were pointing out, you could go build a multifamily building because we have lots of land for that, and that's where the landlords are going to tend to go because there's more bang for the buck there. So I don't know a straight answer for your question other than the one thing I can point to is we're making it smaller, and that's not necessarily enough to prevent demolition. But on the, whether or not this is a fire sale on single-family properties, we got to do some analysis to check that, because I hear the question. And here's the last thing to think about in terms of the pace of demolition and how much change this could result in. You know, when we looked at that 123,000 households by 2035, 30% we project are going to be in the central city, which is good. You know, that's almost doubling the size of the central city, and the more housing we get in the central city, the less of it goes in neighborhoods, and that reduces this problem that people are worried about. 80% we think are going to go on the mixed-use corridors. So Richmond, you guys have seen a lot of that, but it's going to be in more of the city because we have a lot of those corridors. And at some point, you know, the demand for this, that in that type of housing, you know, the reason it's going to grow, we think, is compared to any housing, it isn't affordable to 60%, but it's less expensive. And those 123,000 households that are coming, we're still not, you know, our city is just like the rest of the nation. It's growing, but it's growing at either end of the income spectrum. You know, the rich are getting richer, and we're getting more lower income households. So that's why those apartments in part are it does, I understand the bait and switch you feel, but that's what the 80% is. So then people are saying, our single family houses and our rental units are out of control too, price-wise. More units and more choices, we think, is one way to address that in an equitable fashion. But 20% of that 123,000 households is what's forecast over 25 years for our single family neighborhoods. And so that's about, who can do math real quick?
About 26, 27,000.
So 1,000 a year, or 1,200 a year. Where's 155,000 single-family properties in our city? So 1,000 a year to hit that number. You know, this is all average. So it's not a huge amount of change in the single-family piece. Will it be more than that because our single-family neighborhoods are more desirable? Oh, yeah. So I don't want to misrepresent, but still, it's, in the big scheme of things, relatively incremental.
Boiling a frog.
But the other thing that I'm not going to try to hide the ball on is, of course, this is happening more in some parts of town than others, so some neighborhoods could really see a lot of this, even though across the whole city, the average isn't a big number of units, so I don't want to misrepresent that, because you all, in your version of it, have gone through
Well, how do
a
you
lot
get
of
more
that change.
polycentric type of?
Well, that's the complete neighborhood thing. We're trying to spread it around and have a center, which is the mixed-use stuff.
Many centers.
Yeah, be in there. Okay. Why don't you-
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask a hard
Oh.
question. I just wanted you to clarify something with this lady's question about the
Yeah.
size of the house. You didn't mention in this presentation, I've been to all of them, but this came up in the first one in Multnomah, thank you, that there's a different size limit for different size properties. So like, we've been talking about the 5,000 square foot one, the 5,000 square foot lot and the 2,500 square foot house, but if you have a 7,000 square foot lot, it goes up.
Right.
So there's a larger lot, so you can build a bigger house.
Yeah, they did mention that.
Yeah. Oh, did they? I'm sorry. And did you also
That's
mention
what
that it
happened when you
doesn't
watched
include
the
the
TV
basement? I mean, the square
Didn't talk about
footage
not
doesn't-
including the
yeah.
basement square footage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
doesn't include the basement square footage. So it can actually be a bigger house than it sounds like.
Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. First comment is for the 2,500 square foot maximum, if you put triplex on that lot, there's still a 2,500 square foot maximum. That's about 830 square feet, which seems pretty small. And thinking also with Portland becoming more diverse and larger household sizes becoming, well, with more diverse populations, you have higher household
Larger
sizes.
families.
So can we cram 5 people into a 830 square foot
Well,
house?
so just remember the numbers.
Right.
The average size of household's getting smaller. So when we look at how we're growing, we're going to grow in some households that are bigger, but really most are smaller. And so what we want to do is create options So that part of what happens today is you could be a small household, you could be 2 people, both are working, and you could outbid somebody for a house that is now rented or owned by a family with, that needs the more space. So if we create more options that, are in especially are in attractive transit-rich areas, we can forestall, we think, some of that demand that's going to make it harder for bigger households, especially lower-income bigger households, to find housing.
Yeah, so I guess another way to think about it, this is the intention of this proposal is not to have duplexes replacing every single-family house
Sure.
in the city, right? Or small units everywhere. It's creating a number of opportunities and options for additional opportunities in more places.
My second question was about, well, so I'm graduated a year ago from college, and I'm $90,000 in debt. None of my friends in my age group, age 25 to 35, are even thinking about being able to buy a home unless they've had, a government military kicker, like loan option for them. How will this proposal enable me and many of my other peers who are in a very similar situation go on at least get on a pathway toward homeownership?
It doesn't deal with that directly.
Or-
It increases smaller units, so rental options for folks, but it doesn't eliminate it may prevent some lower cost options for folks, may prevent renters, especially if that's what your age cohort is sort of facing, from being pushed out of neighborhoods because of the price increase. But that doesn't deal with the other one.
This is opening an old wound in a way, but the historic narrow lots, the 25 by 100 flats, which 13 or 14 years ago were highly contested whether they would be allowed as building lots, and were seen and still are seen in neighborhoods where there are a significant number. By some people, they're seen as untruth in zoning, untrue zoning, because you have, and this is making it more so because you're removing the 5-year moratorium. You tear down a house and you have to leave a vacant lot for 5 years before you can build on it. And the intention of that compromise, for those of us who are ancient history remember, is that it was to slow down the demolitions of houses that were built over several 25 by 100 flats and replaced by several 25
Right.
skinny houses.
That's right. So
I'm seeing this as 2 things. You may continue to call it R5 zoning, but really that's very misleading, I think. So please, on the map, let's call it at least how it's being used, if we're going to do it. And maybe notify people, like, your zoning is being changed, because it is,
Right.
and it has been.
which mirrors the gentleman in the back, his comment about getting notice out and letting people know about the change in zoning.
Which is another reason that it should be done.
Yeah, so just to speak a little bit to that point, so this gentleman was talking about home ownership opportunities. What sort of avenues are you creating for home ownership opportunities? Absent going in and changing the land division requirements and allowing for new lots to be split below the minimum or maximum density allowed for that site. Which we're not proposing, we're talking about the existing historically narrow lots and utilizing them in more places. So yes, it's counter to the direction we were 14 or 15 years ago. That is true.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's there's been some talk about breach of trust or something with the public. The neighborhoods were, by and large, where this was happening, were quite opposed to allowing the 25 by 100 flats to be considered building lots. And the compromise was to at least slow that down, and this just throws that.
Well,
into the fire.
reopens an issue that many people thought was settled. So,
I said, it reopens it all.
and it's got a couple of differences, but I'm not denying that that's not true. And what's motivating for us to bring it up again to talk is the housing situation and the demand for housing and the sort of price pressure. The desire for having more households of more sort of different incomes have access to complete neighborhoods. The idea even, there's some reasons to bring it back up, and that it's going to go through and be approved is not a done deal at all. So we're going to have this debate and be reminded of that previous discussion all the way through. So
Well, I think
I'm not going to deny that we're not bringing that back up.
people need to be reminded, and this drastically changes the character of neighborhoods that are quite far from centers, that were developed on 25 by 100 flats, you know, with 100 by 100 lots, 75 by 100 lots, and never 25 by 100 lots until maybe 15 years ago. And then people said, what happened? And then it went through this process, and the city council in its wisdom decided that that was fine. But,
So,
And a quick question for clarification. In the presentation, a large lot is defined as 5,000 square feet or larger?
It's in the comp plan, the large lot.
It's
It's somewhere in the 4,000 to 5,000 square foot range.
just sort of,
minimum.
that's nebulous. So it's not just 5,000, it could be 4,000?
So really, this is just representing of the detached single-family lots and the
Yeah.
detached single-family houses that are built on them, what proportion are on relatively larger or relatively smaller lots. The distinction is,
So our purpose, I think it's 5,000 and up is a large lot.
That's,
Because it's going back to the narrow lot kind of distinction. And it
Okay.
may be 44, it may be 4,000 because of the way the zoning code works, but it's about that and up, it's a large lot.
yeah, recommendation to some of these cozy little court apartments we talked about that are in neighborhoods. Many of them have parking underneath garages, some are too small for today's
Yeah.
cars. But there is parking. And if you're going to be increasing units, 3 to a lot, say, on the street with 40, 45-foot wide lots, which we have a lot of in Northeast, going to have to be some consideration about where people are going to put those vehicles, because they're going to have them. And, you know, for the time being, at least you're going to have them. Maybe all the cars are going to evaporate in here right now. Okay, that's all I have to say about that.
So, we got,
we should be wrapping up. We're at 8 o'clock.
so let's do 5 more minutes of questions, is that okay? Or, because we're going to go back outside and answer
But once you
questions.
go
let's
back
stay here.
outside, we can't all hear each other anymore. It
Yeah.
breaks down at that
Yeah,
point.
but we have 2 different sort of, we really would want to be able to have both settings, so. take it away.
Have you had a chance?
I wanted to say about the parking, and I'm glad that came up, because I don't hear a lot about that. And I realize the pictures you showed us, the neighborhoods look much nicer without the driveways. However, if you're talking about complete neighborhoods where people are with businesses and the houses, if there's no place to park, they are going to be parking in front of businesses, and they are going to impact business. And I think we need to remember businesses where we all are. Without them, we're not going to have a town or a city, excuse me. But I think that's something that needs to be, and particularly if you're talking about multiple buildings, there has to be parking provided for them. If you go to North Portland, you can scarcely find a place to go into any business because the residents have to park in front of them. That's it.
Thank you. In the back?
I just have a couple of clarifications. I think it's really imperative that you define what a large lot is, because I think public perception would say that must be 10,000 square feet somewhere out in the suburbs. And it's very, very difficult for people to understand that we're talking about changing standard single-family lots, because I didn't even realize, I guess I live on a larger lot and I didn't know that. How would I know? Oh, I guess I do. Wow,
Yeah,
I'm so lucky.
I guess I should apologize for that graph. We pulled that information from the comprehensive plan, housing mix data. And for the purposes of this project, it's not really relevant. The current housing mix, what proportion is on large versus small lots, that's just kind of a snapshot in today's picture time. It's not really about the
But
proposal.
if you're talking about putting 2 ADUs on a lot and calling it a larger lot, people may think, well, it can't happen in my neighborhood because it only goes on large lots. Little do they know, it could be 2 right next to you, right in your backyard, and there's no backyard, and it really changes people's perception when you actually give out the square footage.
Yeah, we need to make that clear.
Please do,
No,
that
no,
would be
I hear
really
you.
helpful. And the
We need to make
questionnaire
that clear.
is so difficult to understand. I really hope that you're going to revisit it and make alterations to make it simplified for people like me.
Well, and so, and maybe when we're out of this, let's talk about, show me.
Okay.
And then I'll understand more.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm co-chairing EPAP's housing, so affordability is the issue, and you mentioned it briefly in a lot of things, but I don't see, other than duplex rental units, that it's like you were asking, how can I afford to buy a house and stuff. I don't see you directing. I'm gonna date myself. My first house was 700 square feet, and I had 2 kids in it, and it was fine. It got tight, and that's when we moved to a whole 1,200 square feet, and I raised 2 kids in it. So a lot of these houses out here are 1,200, my whole neighborhood is 1,100 to 1,600 square feet, and everybody raised 2 or 3 kids in it without a problem. Those are what make housing more affordable. People have to change their mindset about how big they need. That's going to have to change, because you're not going to be coming out of school, or even young families can afford 2,200 square feet. But I don't see you directing things to get them even smaller, except in the triplexes and the duplexes, rather than the single families.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and we've settled on this 2,500 because as Morgan showed that range of what's getting
Right.
built, but it could be the wrong number. And the thing about the 1,200s and the 700s, those smaller houses, we're trying to make it so that if on a 5,000 square foot lot, okay?
Well done.
If, depends on where the house is located, but, maybe 2 could fit on there. I know that, and that may be outrageous, and so that's part of what this process is supposed to hear, but, the total between the 2, so if you've got 1,200, you got 1,300 more you could put on the lot, and that's what the flag lot kind of approach.
We have a lot of flags lot here, but I'll give you my street, the 11 to 1,600 square feet, are on 7,000 square feet lots, is what we
Right.
have.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's a sweet backyard.
Yeah.
Well, so we're thinking, like, even in a situation like that, is there room, if someone wanted to, it's not a requirement,
Yeah.
to put another unit on there, and it wouldn't destroy the neighborhood, is there a way to, it's really kind of a question, is there a way to get that to work? We think that it's worth discussing, and we've come up with a proposal about what that might look like.
Well, I think the younger people that want to get in, they have to think starter homes, 700 to 1,200 square feet, and there needs to be more of them out there for them to buy to get started.
Those are getting toward now.
So part of the problem, one of the issues I should say, is it's not so much the square footage of the house that's driving the cost of that structure. It's the land value. So as land value is increasing, if we locked everything into, you can't build any more square footage on any more lots. Those houses are just going to continue to keep getting more and more expensive, right? So we have that is a sort of constant struggle, problem, issue that we're trying to
Part of
address.
the dilemma is that it's tearing down the house, and a bigger house going in, that bigger house and a newer house is going to cost more, right?
Yeah.
But the reason that happens, right, is somebody's willing to buy it.
Yeah.
And so even if we didn't allow that, somebody's still going to be willing to buy a property
that's in the location they want to go because, we haven't, we're going at it by saying if we can provide more units and more choices, we dilute some of that pressure, especially on like a street like you're talking about, but we'll see.
So I'd welcome you all to join us. We're going to be moving this outside, and feel free to chat with us.
Can I answer a quick question?
Yeah, come see me.
Well, it might help everybody, because I think one of the problems with your proposals is people are getting really confused about how much parking is or is not required on different parts of the proposal.
Okay.
So you might want to just address that.
Sure. Yeah, 1 second to talk about parking.
1
Yeah,
second.
please.
Last question. This is a good one. Thank you.
So, as far as, so the current code requires 1 space per dwelling unit, right? 1 space per dwelling unit, unless you're within 500 feet of a frequent bus route. The proposal doesn't change that. If you're building a duplex, it's 1 space per dwelling unit. Each of those ADUs do not require parking, and this proposal does not change that, unless we change that. But as it's currently proposed, that we're not touching the parking except for your narrow lot issue.
Except for ADUs and except for narrow lots.
So ADUs, the current code does not require parking. We're not proposing to change that. Does that help?
Just those are the only 2 places where parking will not be required unless they're within 500 feet.
So 500 feet, ADUs, and skinny houses. Not required.
Narrow lots.
Narrow lots.
What's it called?
Great. Well, thank you all. And let's continue outside.